Free agency commences, and wouldn't you know it, another Brooklyn Nets bombshell as out of legitimately left field, Kevin Durant requests a trade directly to Brooklyn Nets owner Joe Tsai. The fallout is fast and furious. We're going to break down what it means in the short term. Obviously, there's a lot of sadness to sort through. And where does the blame fall? Possibly on every single part of what ends up being a bit of a disaster in Brooklyn. Let's break it down, friends, right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Oh, yes. Even in the bad times, friends, it's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings, DraftKings, FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbett, breaking down the New York Football Giants with my boy Andy Makowitz over on the One Giant podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, take it away for a moment as we're going to dive in on Kevin Durant's trade request and the fallout in Brooklyn. I just need to rest my brain for a minute.
Oh my gosh. I mean, this has been almost too much. It's almost too much to handle here. Look, Adam put in the absolute Lord's work. If you're watching this over on YouTube, he did like a 2-hour live stream of just sort of what was breaking down in the moment. Definitely go back and check that out. I jumped on, a bunch of other Locked On people jumped on for their opinions because this was just sort of earth-shattering news. And the long and short of it is, we headed into free agency wanting to see what was going to happen with the Nets, what kind of moves they would make, what kind of, how they could bolster the roster around KD and Kyrie, now that Kyrie re-signed. And then lo and behold, you get Kevin Durant saying that he would like a trade out of Brooklyn. And just in one basic tweet that came from Woj, and I can't forget who broke it first, it basically upended the entire Brooklyn Nets organization in one move. This is the worst case scenario. This is the exact thing you do not want to happen. This is the fear when you have superstars on your team, especially ones that, can be maybe a little curmudgeonly or not happy or whatever the situation is. The fear and the worry that hangs over every organization when you have this player is that one day the player will not want to be on the team anymore. And that is what happened with the Brooklyn Nets and Kevin Durant today. That is the exact scenario that you pray as an organization, once you've given up the farm to kind of bring guys in and kind of make a championship run, that at the back end of that, or with lots of years left that we'll talk about, that the player will say, nope, somewhere else, please. And that is basically the end, because 99 times out of 100, these guys get their way on this. So we'll talk about the whole thing, but that's kind of where I am right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. Obviously you always want to commit to getting the superstar or working the process to get the superstar. Not every team in the league can accomplish it, even if they do all of the precursor steps to being in a position to sign a player like Kevin Durant, a player like Kyrie Irving, and on down the line. Before I think we do dive in on what all of this means and the fallout from it, to your point, let's back up our timeline a little bit and set the table for this, including the only whiff or rumor, I said it at the top, completely out of left field. The only speculation was around entering, and this is where we start, I think, the resetting of the timeline, Kyrie Irving and what the expectations were as he was initially offered the opportunity to seek a sign and trade and then opted in. In and around that, you heard the one little thing was the Brooklyn Nets are walking into these negotiations understanding, were they to go sideways, they are willing to and know they could lose both Kyrie Irving and, as a fallout, Kevin Durant. That was all we ever heard, though. And once Kyrie Irving opted in, it kind of felt like we took that collective sigh and said, all right, we don't know what it means ultimately, but at least we have more time. Turns out that was about 36 to 48 hours of time.
Was it even that much time? I don't even know if it was that much time. Yeah, in retrospect, you look back and maybe you want to read a tea leaf here and there. Sometimes with the reporting around, a player hasn't been in contact, this can mean any different thing. Like, who knows? These things change on a whim. I really don't believe that anyone had it firmly in their heart of hearts felt like free agency was going to open with Kevin Durant requesting the trade. The reason I know this is because no one was basically, like you said, no one was talking about it. This was not a major talking point. The talking points around the Nets were who, like, they were going to get on mid-level exceptions, who they could maybe sign to bolster the roster, if they were going to be able to pull a trade off, not involving Kevin Durant, like other trades,
Right.
like these other. So that was the majority of the talk. Like, if you do a media lap before free agency started, and believe me, I did 12 of them today because I was like up at 6 a.m. being like, oh my God, I gotta wait 12 hours to figure out what's going to go on here. This is crazy. I just know because we did all the laps this morning. And so then to have this bombshell basically just get dropped, I'm going to say just pretty much out of nowhere, that Kevin Durant wants out. I will say, I'm going to try not to be too negative about this. This is very close to like an organizational death knell, at least for the short term. Like, when superstar players want out of a place, the Nets, we'll talk about what the Nets have or don't have when it comes to their future assets, like what they don't even own, a lot of them. Like, this is a very, very, very bad moment for the Nets. Like, just in terms of overall league buy-in around how the rest of the league sees them, like in regards to Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, who by all accounts are very well liked among other players. Like, people see this stuff, and all of a sudden you have Kevin Durant who wants to be traded. And now you're sitting, I mean, talk about catching a falling knife. Like, you're sitting with Durant. You probably have to try to honor his request. You have to try to somehow get fair value, which you won't, by the way. Like, just because this is like, you can't piece
There
together.
is no fair value.
No, there's no fair value. What are you going to get Giannis back? I mean, like, there's the list of players is so short that could one-to-one return, and no one's trading those guys. And so we do sit at a very, very weird inflection point for the Nets right now that could still, it's not done yet, I guess, but there's, on a micro and macro sense, Kevin Durant asking for a trade is definitely just the worst thing that could happen to them as a franchise, like short of a player dying or something like that. Like, I'm not just trying to be hyperbole here, but like from a basketball point of view, strictly, Kevin Durant asking out with this many years left on his contract is legit the worst thing that could happen to the organization.
Yeah, I think what's so not funny, but what's so fascinating about it is if Kevin Durant a year from now asked out of the contract, it would look and feel so much differently relative to where the Brooklyn Nets are. Not just because you're 1 year further removed from asset allocation that you made in the James Harden trade. Not just because, as we talked about, pushing off that 2023 draft pick from the Philadelphia 76ers, which they may have utilized already in a little bit of a free agent trade acquisition, but knowing more, having more clarity about your roster, even if it meant beyond this upcoming season, Kevin Durant is going to be gone or Kyrie isn't going to be here. Okay, but we'll get clarity about some of our young talent. We'll get clarity around Ben Simmons, right? So much of what we thought this year could be was just getting affirmation around what we have, don't have, and what's going to happen going forward, because this seemingly just comes and blindsides the organization. I was going to say, I was about to say I'm not blaming it. I know we're going to talk about this, of course, of the episode. I do have blame in and around on all parties here, but my perspective and opinion on the way, not just Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, players in general, the game, the league, the way these things are processing and the direction things could be heading here, it's a very tumultuous time, and one where it does feel like everyone gets to cry over their spilt milk and then demand not that they want a fresh cup, but they want to go drink it in somebody else's house. Like, it's really a weird, that part of that is swirling in me. I know we're going to get to it, but my head is getting overrun with a lot of different emotions around the basketball, the player side, and then just covering sports in general.
Yeah, this is not only, and believe me, I got a absolute filibuster on this subject coming up next. But but this is even bigger than the Nets. Like, this situation is going to be referenced now league wide. I'll get to it in a minute why that's going to be the case, but this is not something that's just going to, like, Kevin Durant gets traded and then we'll see what happens. No, the after effects of this request are going to be felt around the league on, like, a number of different levels. And when you talk about blame, I mean, I joked before that I just blame everybody. I kind of do in some way, because everyone feels culpable here. Then I think Durant is culpable. I think Kyrie is culpable. I think the organization is culpable in, like, their absolute misreads of this whole thing for, like, the last 2 years of just utter misread after misread about every situation. And I don't even think it's purposeful. It's like they just clearly misread some situations.
The misread, by the way, was signing Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant and thinking that you were going to be successful with them. Like, I think that, like, it's like it goes all the way back to square one on it. And in some ways, it has to, right? I mean, it's not about Kevin Durant so much, but you have to look at it with Kyrie Irving and his track record and say, this makes three. This makes three that it hasn't quite gone right. But I know we'll get there.
All right. I'm going to go off on both sides here, but probably a little more on the KD side in a second. First, going to talk to you about our friends over at Arcade 1UP. Oh, these were the days. Players weren't requesting trades, and maybe some of them were. We were playing 2-on-2 basketball, NBA Jam, and Arcade 1UP is bringing it all back. Arcade style retro arcade games. They're bringing back the best game ever. They made it even bigger with a wait for it here, a Shaq edition machine. No one bigger than Shaq. And one of the first sports games ever to feature real and digitized NBA licensed team. Just speaking personally, NBA Jam was the absolute jam. No fouls, no free throws, no quarters required this time around. You can compete with friends and family on the all new Wi-Fi leaderboards. It makes you completely connected. You have to go to Arcade 1UP. That's arcade, the number 1up.com. for an estimated early September ship date on the NBA Jam machine. They also have Golden Tee, Mortal Kombat, stuff like that. Only $3.99. Perfect addition to your man cave. That's arcade1up.com/lockedon. You've got until July 8th to enter to win that NBA Jam Shaq Edition console. Go check it out now. arcade1up.com/lockedon.
All right, I'm going to let you dive in on just your perspective around Kevin Durant and the blame game a little bit here, but I will say, it's good. I know it's going to be a part of this conversation, but the trade request has been made. In theory, the Brooklyn Nets, yes, they are obliged to honor it. But you mentioned there in the first segment, this is a bad look for the Brooklyn Nets amongst players in the league and being able to attract different talent, especially on the free agent market. If your reputation is already sullied, you might as well dig your heels in and say, yeah, we'll do it when we're good and ready, buddy. Because guess what? You are under contract. We don't have to do anything, and our prospects are not going to be any brighter, to your point, in the immediate future after we move you.
For sure. So just for a little precedent here, okay, on the one hand, when players ask out of teams, they almost always get their way. Like if you look at the recent versions of this, Anthony Davis, Kawhi Leonard, like these are the players that wanted to be traded. And they went out for huge hauls. The teams, there's more. Teams very often just acquiesce because, I mean, even Ben Simmons like ended up getting his way on that one. Like teams will acquiesce because it's better to just try to get something in return than to have a surly superstar around your team and just cut bait if it's just not going to work. Kobe Bryant was the one that didn't. Wanted to trade. Lakers didn't do it. Ended up winning a championship. I guess there's like that version that could happen. It feels really pretty unlikely. The part where a player who just signed a massive max extension with a team less than a year ago had, and some of this is going to be repeated from the YouTube, so just bear with me, but it bears repeating. The part where a year ago you looked at this organization and were so confident in them, at least in taking the money, that you were willing to sign for the next 5 years with this team because you felt confident in the direction, the front office, the ownership. You shouldn't do that. If you do not feel that, do not sign the contract. No one put a gun to anyone's head to do that. That's a long-term commitment that you say, I believe in this team for the long term. Maybe not everything will go correct. It might not all be right. There might be some wild cards in here that we didn't know about, right? Kyrie Irving, James Harden, like COVID, whatever, Ben Simmons. Like there's other injuries. There's other stuff. But when you make that commitment, because the team's got to pay you, when you make that commitment for 5 years, you're saying, I'm going to be with you through the thick and thin here. It might not be 5 years of wedded bliss, but in the end, I believe in the aggregate, we have a winning formula. For 1 year later, for that to be so bad, and I'm putting this in quotes, bad, that you would ask out is such a bad look for the player empowerment piece, because what is the point of signing the contract to begin with? Like, and we all know this is the dirty secret. The dirty secret is you sign and you ask out later, right? Take the money, ask out later. I get it. That's kind of the way the league works. But the part where, like, this is just the way the machine of the NBA works now is a joke. And yeah, am I fired up a little bit more about it because it happened to the team I cover? For sure, 100%. Did I get this fired up about Anthony Davis? Definitely not. This fired up about Kawhi Leonard? Definitely not. I get it. But it does highlight, it'll come for everybody. It'll come for every team at some point. Like every team's going to have experienced this at some point. That, the unhappy superstar comes for ye all. And the part where Kevin Durant, and I'll finish this up here, but the part where Kevin Durant, with 4 years left on a contract, is willing to say, I want out. It's this bad. We can't solve it. I want to go somewhere else, taking my ball and going somewhere else, is going to be something that I frankly believe that there's a good chance the owners just lock the players out over this when it comes to CBA negotiations. Because how can you run an organization? How can you run an organization where it is the second the ink is not barely dry on the contract, and you are sitting there with your hands sitting on your hands, hoping against all hope that the guy doesn't leave if you make a misstep or two? I'm not absolving the ownership and the general management. They made mistakes 100%. But like, there's no world where they would ever trade Kevin Durant after they sign that 5-year contract. You know what I mean? Right. So like, it's a totally bonkers system. And go jump on YouTube and go tweet me and tell me I'm wrong about this. Anyway, that's it. Filibuster over. That's where I stand on this. It's a ridiculous situation.
Well, by the way, on that point, LeBron James has done versions of, I'll sign a 1-and-1, right? I'll do this thing where I'm in and then I'll stay in and we'll see how things go. And that's certainly a version that any superstar player can approach these with as, hey, let's do this short term. But the bad part about that, and you use the NBA Finals as the backdrop, because in speaking with John Careless about this, the Boston Celtics, they have this core and they're young enough, and you want to keep pushing with that and try to keep the nucleus together and then build around them and flesh out the depth. The Golden State Warriors, we know those 3 players with Curry and Green and Klay Thompson. And then, yes, they had a really bad year. And you know what? They all stayed there, right? They didn't move off of it. And the reward was having really high draft capital and still being a really talented team. And my concern on your point is, it's like, first of all, I find it insane, to your point, signing the contract and then being like, you know what? I'm all good here. And you're running afoul of the benefit of having player empowerment. Well, now it's like you're abusing it. And if the league were to shift to what might be a better model, just to avoid these circumstances of, hey, superstars, we're going to go on 1-and-1s, it diminishes the entire excitement and lean in from fan bases and teams and players alike. If, hey, every 2 years, the best players in the league are going somewhere else. They're going to pivot. They're going to move. They're going to change. And I know there's already been examples of this throughout the league. And these 2 players have already been on multiple teams themselves. But I think it just sets a very bad precedent and look for where the league could end up, where it's all about, yeah, if I want it, if I'm good with it right now, tomorrow could totally be different. And that's just, man, it's a really dim landscape. And yes, I look at it far more egregiously now that it happened to the team that we cover.
And it doesn't happen with every superstar. There's plenty that have just been fine. Giannis, there's plenty of guys out there that are just, with the teams and have stuck with Dame. There's plenty.
Really quick. Is that a buyer beware scenario around who you sign and the personality type? Because it need not be.
It should be. It should be. When you look back at the track record, you can't be surprised.
Yep.
Wanted out of OKC because you didn't like the situation. One out of arguably the most perfect situation in Golden State, where you probably just win the title every single year from then on out. And then, so like when you look back at that, and then you look at Kyrie, I mean, who hasn't technically asked out yet, but I mean, how far behind are we on this one? Like like there's almost no chance. And so where he's asked out of Cleveland, wants out of Boston. They did it with Harden. We saw Harden tank to get to a new team. And turns out, if he's going to tank for the old team, he'll tank for you too. Like, it's just like, there's just not like, so when you look back at the track record, yeah, it doesn't look great. And you think to yourself, oh man, we got bit too. Like, if we're going to go roll around in the dirt with these guys, you gotta understand that. I guess we're going to get dirty also. You can't look at those past situations and wipe them away, but you want to as a fan, because you say to yourself, well, here it'll be different because we're going to win and get a championship, and you're sold on this bill of goods. And then it turns out that didn't really matter. Like,
we're not special or unique. We are everyone else and everywhere else.
And look, yes, these last couple of years have gone as bad. If you played this last couple of years out 100 times, 99 times, it does not have so many bad things happen. Like,
this is the worst one. This is the worst version of the multiverse. This is the full madness.
This is Doctor Strange holding up the one, except in this version of the one, Thanos just ripped through and killed everybody, right? But yes, if you play it out 100 times or 1,000 times, this is just about as bad as you could ever hope from all the different stuff that ran into a pandemic, ran into like the one guy who didn't, well, one of the few guys who didn't want to get vaccinated in the one of the few cities that like just had the hardest rules around it. Like anyone, that's just one thing. Durant injuries, Joe Harris injuries, Harden in, Harden out, Ben Simmons doesn't want to play. I mean, the list goes on and on and on with this stuff. So I get it. Like if you're Kevin Durant and you're part of that, from his perspective, how could you look at that and be like, hey, am I going to have another year of this BS? I do get it from that perspective. But I think at some point, like,
yeah, I get it from that perspective, but you think it's not frustrating or this BS from the organization side too? It's everybody. Yeah, this sucks. We all agree it sucks. Now help us make it better, right? I mean, that's the idea. Let's all be committed to trying to fix it. And I get it. The shelf life for a player is far different than the shelf life of an organization or a GM or an owner. But sorry,
well,
we're going to move off.
Well, it's shorter, but it's much more lucrative. So like right. It's like the timeline is shorter for sure, but the dollars are like 10x or yep. Whatever like the highest paid person is. So it's not like you're not getting something from it. And again, I'm very much, I want to be very clear about this. I am pro player like almost throughout. Like the players are the product, the players are the talent, the players are what drive the league, the players are who you want to see. The players should have an inordinate amount of power. And the best players should have an even more inordinate amount of power because they drive the action. Do I feel like people would still watch basketball if the talent level was, 10% worse? Probably, because they wouldn't know the difference, right? But so I'm totally pro player. Players should do as much as they want to do. I'm just more lamenting a situation where it's very difficult as a fan to root for a situation like this. And it's probably even more impossible to do long-term range building for a team in a world where this kind of stuff can happen.
Yep.
And I'm as free market as it gets, and people should always go out there, and the team doesn't have to trade them. They could do something else. Like there's other worlds and that can make this happen. So I'm not backtracking on my disappointment around it as much to say like, everybody in the world wants to put themselves in the best situation for the most money. Like that's not, that's not just something that only happens in the NBA. It just sucks that this is the way it plays out. All right.
Can I really quick on that? Just say, and I did take it however you want. And sure. Also, once you make a decision, there's a difference between being a child about it or being a grown up about it. Like there is something about making a commitment in any facet of your life and then being like, I made this commitment. It's on me to step up and to be a part of that. Like there is a little part of that for me, for any NBA player, any of this stuff where I go, what are we doing? You said it. You know what I mean? That's the equivalent of me saying, I like covering the Brooklyn Nets and I want to cover them with you, Doug Norrie. And then you show up and I show up for the first year of covering the team. And then one day I just say, I'm good. And that's it. I'm out. You'll never see me again on the podcast. You'll never see me send another tweet and I leave you holding it. And I also indicate to you that it's kind of your fault.
Yeah. I look, right. And I think there's maybe there's other pieces of this we don't understand. Maybe there's promises that were made to him that they didn't fulfill, right? Like, and this is why that they're, seem to be, amicable to just making a trade happen. There didn't seem to be any pushback around, not doing it. I don't think they're going to take a garbage offer just because he wants out, but there was no, under the bus throwing. I will say the under the bus stuff typically comes after the trade is made. That's when you get the articles about like the attitude and all this other stuff. And, a bunch of stuff gets floated to reporters and that usually happens post trade. So like, I'm not like, there is a world where Durant says, hey, they promised me these 5 things and they just didn't follow through on it. Yep. Right. Like, yep. And like, we don't know, there's, or they promised they were going to sign Kyrie and they didn't do it, and that's a bridge too far, sign him long-term. And that's a bridge too far for me. That's real to me. Like, I get it. If you feel there's clearly a part where he feels slighted or something happened with them. If it was all good, they wouldn't, why'd you break up? Do you think you could have made it? It's like, oh, we wouldn't have broke up if it was all good. Like it was because it was bad that we broke up. And so I totally 100% get that part of it. And there's a good chance we'll never know because this player stuff doesn't often get floated out the same way as it does from the team side. So, but like a reasonable person could like easily just look at that situation and say, oh yeah, like they said they were going to do a bunch of different stuff. They said they were going to keep Harden happy. They said they were going to sign, Kyrie long-term. They didn't follow through on any of it. Like they said Simmons was good to play and they botched that because he couldn't play. Like there's a lot of worlds where he could look at this organization and be like, these guys don't know what they're doing. Yeah. Right. So
plenty of punches to throw at them.
Definitely
plenty of punches there.
There was a little bit of free agent news. All right, we'll get into a little bit of free agent stuff. We'll kind of blow through some free agent stuff, and then we'll probably end up covering it more over the weekend. Hopefully, the weekend will let the dust settle a little bit, and we'll have something of an idea what's going to happen here with Kevin Durant. First, going to talk to you about our friends over at betonline.net. Betonline.net, the absolute best place for all of your betting options right now. All the sports developments you could ever need. Obviously, rolling through Major League Baseball stuff right now. They had a bunch of NBA stuff in terms of the championship odds. Nets had been sixth, I think, last time. That number has dropped. I'll look at that in a second. They actually just took it off the board because the Nets themselves are just too much of an unknown at this point. BetOnline.net. We'll have it back up there. Rest assured, very shortly, Nets will not be as high on the list anymore over at BetOnline.net. They also, over the weekends, MMA, boxing, golf, everything covered to you over there. Head on over to BetOnline.net. You learn about all the trends, all of the action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Okay, so the other part of this is we were sitting around waiting for free agency to kick off to see what kind of interesting small moves the Nets might make. Some names out there on the wire. You mentioned it. We said Patty Mills had opted out. A little bit of a surprise, I would say. He comes right back to the organization on a 2-year deal, close to $14 million. So obviously he ends up getting a little bit more guaranteed money. I'm going to say these all in succession, and then we can touch back to them. Nicolas Claxton also returning to the Brooklyn Nets on a 2-year, $20 million deal. And the Nets also sent out a future first-round pick for Royce O'Neal for the Utah Jazz, just like we knew they would. He has 2 years left on his contract as well. Both years just under $10 million, a little north of $9 million. I lumped them together in that way. We'll break down the more important ones, the players that were Brooklyn Nets. All to say, all of these seem like things that are saying pause button. We may find an opportunity to move any of you in the coming months or over the next season or two, as opposed to where we would have been if Kevin Durant was going to be returning and if they were going to be keeping Kyrie Irving. The Nicolas Claxton number specifically, I think, would have been longer years and would have been more money. Patty Mills maybe wouldn't have been back at all, and yet here we are.
Yeah, so the one other problem that we didn't bring up, I'm going to get to all these guys in 1 second, but the one other problem that we didn't bring up with where the Nets situation is now is the Nets cannot tank. They can't, even if they were to trade Durant for a bunch of assets, tanking is useless to them because all of their picks are conveyed to the Rockets, either through the actual pick or through pick swaps. Being bad for the Nets over the next couple of years is just not an option. Now they can go and get other teams' picks and hope that those teams are bad, and the teams those picks end up becoming more worthwhile. But the Nets in their own pick situation cannot. There's no point in being bad at all. They might as well, in terms of ticket sales and competitiveness and building to the future, they have to just win because Houston we talked about this with Jackson Gatlin. Houston's the biggest beneficiary of this whole thing. They got to be sitting there just so happy, right? Because the Nets picks are all going to almost definitely look better, and the swaps could arguably be awesome later if the Nets really just kind of the whole thing goes south. So with that in mind, these moves, it'd be the weirdest thing ever to make long-term veteran moves with, Kevin Durant when Kyrie Irving were going out the door, but you have to remember the Nets don't want to lose. Right? So signing, I like the Royce O'Neal trade a lot when they originally, I'm like, okay, nice little wing, nice wingspan, can guard up to the 4, knocks down 40% of threes. I'll take that. It came 20 minutes before the trade request. So that was the end of that little bit. Patty Mills, I'm actually surprised he re-signed here. They must just probably offered him the most money.
A quick note on that, I would say, having talked it over with some other Locked On guys, was it, on the one hand, it's you probably get him the most guaranteed money and you can always still move him. The connection with Sean Marks from the Spurs as well. And then in the short term, a veteran presence because you're going to be filled up with a lot of young bodies. So he's a good representation of what you want from a player, even in the short term. Go on.
And Claxton, at this point, 2 for 20. That looks fine. Maybe he becomes sort of a piece that you have as part of a little mini rebuild, or he's a piece that you can ship off later to a team if you're able to just get him more reps. So I don't mind each of those moves in a vacuum. And I agree they look a little weird with the context of a team that looks like it's headed in the wrong direction. Mm-hmm. But again, I'm just saying as a reminder that the Nets, just what they bring back, they're going to keep trying. The team might be, a fringe playoff team, but there's no point. They can't head to the basement here. They just can't. And so when that's in mind, you kind of have to keep putting your best foot forward to just do right by the fans, to do right by ticket sales, to do right by the organization, to continue to look good in other people's eyes. Remember, the Nets built a culture. I know people hate that word, a culture on doing the best with what little they had at the time. And I think you'll at least for the short term, see that effort to say, hey, we're still a place you should want to come. We're still trying to do the right thing here. And that's what I think some of these moves at least point to.
And it will be fascinating to see when it comes to the trade offers that start to build up around Kevin Durant and ultimately what happens with Kyrie Irving. We talk so much about, Paul George and the baseline of 5 draft picks with some swaps involved there from OKC to the Clippers, as well as a player like SGA. To your point, well, the draft capital is important because we don't have any of that going forward, but more important is going to be, where can these guys go? Where can we get these guys to that we bring back through 2, 3, 4, 5 players that, while not the answer for a championship, are the short-term answer of being competitive and trying to, again, hang on to the back end of the playoff picture in the Eastern Conference. Like, that's probably what they're trying to look and build around. And I'll leave a footnote here that we'll discuss in the days and weeks to come. Very fascinating to see a guy like Nicolas Claxton or any of these young talents. You're about to enter into a season where you don't have superstar talent on the floor with you. So we're going to learn what these guys' true value is and what their skill sets are when it is just you and not having a lot of the weight and the pressure taken off and the attention when you have a player like Kevin Durant on your team.
Yeah, this will be the most fascinating new subplot is what they want, what they stand firm on asking for, like what they stand firm on saying, because they don't have to trade him right now. Like, they can do the Ben Simmons move here where it's like, you want to be traded?
Here's the problem. I'll say, and here's why they will, though, and they'll do it sooner than later. To your point, we need to be competitive. And if we're going to wait for the right offer, Kevin Durant's not going to step on the floor. He'll do the Ben Simmons. I'm not going to come near the team until I get traded. So that means you're going to be bad now because you don't even have that quality there on the court, whatever version it is. So it's a terrible situation all around, and the Brooklyn Nets are up against the wall and needing to make smart decisions quickly, which is a dangerous combination in the NBA landscape.
Yeah, and we'll be here over the weekend. Look, if something happens over the weekend, we don't, typically Monday through Friday here, but obviously if something happens over the weekend, we'll jump on the podcast. Obviously, Adam, the absolute hero with this stuff. This guy's on hour 17 out of the last 10 hours, I think. I think he put in 17 hours in 10 hours in terms of just
that
content.
Math checks.
Yeah, the math checks out. I was following along. So believe me, I rounded all the right numbers there, carried the right decimal point. So so if something happens over the weekend, we will definitely jump on, give a reaction both on the pod and on YouTube. And also, I think over this weekend, we will start to see maybe some more things shake out about what the actual packages look like. There have been some things thrown out, some Sun stuff. And that was the one that kind of picked up a little steam because that's where it seemed like KD wanted to go. But I think after, by Monday, I think we'll either know, or we'll just have a more clarity sense around what it's going to be.
And some rumors that Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving do still want to play together somewhere.
Maybe it's in Brooklyn. Who knows? These guys. Who could know with these guys? Maybe get a weekend, a few drinks in, and all of a sudden, you figured out Brooklyn's the place.
Make some bad choices. Come on, let's go.
Go over and check out. Like I said it a couple of times, but go over and check out what Adam did on YouTube today. It's 2 hours. There was thousands of people in there during this. He did a live, just kind of up in the moment reactions to the KD stuff and free agency. I was on there for a little bit, but that was Adam really carrying the whole load there. Go check it out. Like I said, thousands and thousands and thousands of people were checking this thing out in the moment. Probably one of the biggest things the Locked On Nets YouTube has ever done. So make sure you go check out what Adam did. Subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube while you're over there, and subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast as well.
I want so much that is not here, and I do not know where to go. Charles Bukowski.
Oh, not Pete Bukowski. I got a little confused there. Both of them are some of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again Monday talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.